Our next session, before we go on to the next session, I just want to quote Don Marquez. Publishing a volume of verse is like dropping a rose petal down the Grand Canyon and waiting for the echo. Ties into the next session called Publishing Poetry. Welcoming on stage Jamuna Rao and Medha Singh with Sundeep Bhutoria. The Perils and Occasional Pleasure.
We are here for this session, Publishing Poetry. And thank you, the festival committee, for inviting us to have this session with you. I have with me the two very distinguished women, Ms. Jamuna Rao and Medha Singh. Medha Singh is a poet, and her acclaimed first book is very famous, and Jamuna Rao is from her own city, a publisher of her own right, who has incredibly published the one Prime Minister, 3 Chief Minister, and a Union Minister. So welcome you both, ma'am. And to the start with, one question which is relevant to both of you, as we are sitting here in this Bengaluru Poetry Festival. Since this festival deals with poetry, if you could both tell me one by one that where does poetry stand today in the terms of publishings? Aren't publishers today hesitant to publish poetry? What as a publisher your take on that? And what as a poetess and your book is already in the, you should think about this thing.
Should I? Okay. See, poetry as an art form, or rather the business of poetry, I must say, as a publisher, it survives in two different but not mutually exclusive environments. One is the environment of patronage, and the other is the environment of a crowd, you know, a mass environment. See, the patronage, a poet like Ghalib, he functioned in the patronage environment. And what he said about his cohorts, Zauq and Momin, sums up the environment. He said, "Hua hai sheh ka muhasib, fire hai itrata, wagarna shehr mein Ghalib ki abru kya hai." I dare not translate the rhetoric, but it basically means that he has become the favorite of the king and struts about. But in the city, Ghalib is Ghalib. I hope. So that sums up the patronage environment. Next, you see, you have, in more modern times, you have the state as the patron. One very good thing about state patronage is that it gives awards. And once somebody gets a Sahitya Academy or a Gyanpith, the poet becomes known. And once a poet becomes known, it is easier to publish him. He gets translated. It gives him a new lease. I mean, it gives poetry a new lease of life. The mass environment requires a movement. It could be the Bhakti movement. It could be the national. Movements have great intensity. They have great passion. And this intensity and passion throws up poets. Now, these poets, once again, there's a little star system which works here. Some of them become famous, and the ones who become famous and once the movements die down, they are made offers by the market. So from here, they go on to, you know, something like the cinema, the radio. And once, you know, even that dies out as a medium of publishing, they move on to the internet and the social media, which is today the most important media. Now, this is the environment of, in the patronage itself, this is self-patronage. Even earlier, you had self-patronage. I think Tagore published his own poems. Even Premchand tried to publish himself. But today, anybody can just you know, bypass both the publisher and the state and say, I'll put it up on the internet. So that is where poetry stands in the publishing world today.
Yeah, Ms. Singh, please, what's your... Yes, you are. Everybody here? No, we can use this one then.
So what Mrs. Rao spoke about is a later stage. See, I edit a magazine, co-edit a magazine called Cold Noon with a formidable person called Dr. Arup K. Chatterjee. And we publish hundreds and hundreds of poems every year. And the thing is that before going into a book and putting a book out, one has to sort of test the waters. And that's where magazines play a very important role, literary journals and so on and so forth. I also advise other people who want to get published to first seek out proper publications and see if their work matches the ethos of that publication. And that's a very important thing because sometimes magazines also respond and give feedback, and it gives you enough space to expand and open your work up to newer things, newer worlds, create newer intensities inside oneself. And I think that that is what really makes one's work authentic and acceptable. At one level, there are all these things present, but then there is the whole business of publishing, which is what I think the question is concerned about. And that is a very, I mean, there are a lot of poets who don't consider very simple things like reading the submission guidelines or making sure that the poem is not a naive kicking in the air. If you're talking about experimentation, then it has to really show. You have to know the rules to break them because the editors are not fools. A lot of poets take rejections very personally, and the best advice is to not try to fight with the editors. If one gets rejected, send more work. Send more work. Keep sending it till you get accepted. And if one persists in writing poetry, some magazine will accept it at some point. But most importantly, I think it's important to not publish also. One needs to take their time to be sure of it. There's a poet that I really admire. His name is Vijay Nambisan. In the last 22 years, he's had 2 collections of poems. One 22 years ago, and one, I think, in 2015. And that fundamental urge to not publish, he was taking his time for the book to cook. And I think that is a very, very important aspect. And I know I'm talking about the creative process, but it reflects in one's writing. And these are the things, when they're visible, are highly desirable in publishing. To sort of, editors work a lot. Ma'am knows, she's seen manuscripts a lot. So a lot of the time we're treating it just like rushed, hurried work. But every now and then you come across a poem that will totally suspend time, sort of kill that sense of a shortness of time. And that is what publishers are really looking for. Now, are novelists, are presses reluctant to publish poetry? Yes, very much so. Because novels are what the masses are willing to pay for. Whereas a lot of the time, poetry is made available for free on social media, on different platforms like Instagram and Facebook, which is also giving visibility to poetry. It's giving rise to a kind of popular sensibility, which is great. People are engaging with verse. But at some level, maybe it's too early to make that judgment. It's not going beyond that. People think writing free verse is just writing whatever they feel like, but that requires a lot of tension, a lot of careful attention to notice where you want to create a sense of calm, sense of anxiety, basically where you want to break the line, even in free verse. So, for instance, if a poet ends the line is the fundamental unit of the poem. All of these things, they're very particular things, but publishers notice them a lot. So if the line ends with a strong word, then it creates the mood for the rest of the poem. If it ends with a weak word, it is leading you on into the next line. All of these things are very important to keep in mind. So when one is writing free verse, one must be careful. If one is writing formal verse, that also requires a different kind of deliberation and attention. And in all of these formalistic concerns, it's very important not to let the light of your poem get dispersed. That is also very important to maintain. That's what publishers are looking for. It catches you by the throat.
Okay, thank you. Before I move to next question, a quick comment with you, Spikman. What you mentioned is the state patronage of the awards and Sahitya academies and many of the state academies we have. We all know how politicized these academies has become because in fact Ashok Vajpayee sir was here and he's, you know the whole controversy when all the poets has returned their awards in the recent political scenario of the Sahitya Academy or all the academies is. And based on your comment, what you said about the judicial thing, I think in today's era we believe that even the publishing is also considered to be digital publishing as well, because Chiki Sarkar has established a whole new digital publishing house in Delhi, which is doing apparently quite well. Now, a second question, which is again relevant to both of you equally, is because you yourself into editing and doing publishing as well. So and you wrote poetry on your own. So when we're talking about this commercialization of the novels or romance or chiclets or whatever it is in compared to the poetries, when you write a poetry as your poet yourself, you think that you'd write on a love, or you'd write on a nature, or you'd write on peace, or you write on oceans, and then you write a poetry, or it's you feel that this is coming from your heart and then is a poetry become. And same way as a publisher, do you have fixed quotas? There's these many love poetries I have to publish, these many poetries on nature I have to publish, or these many poetries on peace I have to publish, or it's just for the quality you see? Like same, if you could just tell me, it's the poems which you write or the poetry which you write, it's just what's come from your heart and mind you write, or you decide what you're going to write? And if you could tell us, the audience, that when you decide about publishing, whether it's like because you have fixed quotas for 10 books of each slot in the publishing, you choose, or might be, if you have a 10 quotas of the romantic poetry and you have to see 15 good romantic poets, you discard 5 romantic poetry in that and you'll publish 10. And while you have quota for 10 poetries on nature and you received only 6, you've given a chance to 4 other people who are not considerably good as the 5 left of the romantic poets, sir. Thank you.
Okay. And the first question on awards, you see, however politicized an award may be, it still boosts the morale of whoever receives it and does give a boost to publishing. Now in Karnataka, we have a writer called Masti Venkatesh Iyengar. Now many people had never heard of him till he received the Gyanpith at the age I think he was touching 90 when he received it. Yet I feel that it made a very big difference because once he becomes a Gyanpith winner, somebody Googling for Gyanpith awardees from Karnataka will at least see his name and perhaps go and read his books, which are truly beautiful. Chikvir Rajendra is a classic. So an award, however politicized, whatever it is an award and does a lot of morale boosting for the poet particularly. And as far as publishing is concerned, it makes the author visible. Okay. Now within that, the publisher can decide, okay, this is not up to the mark, I will not. And the government, the establishment itself, the state is a very big publisher. Once you get a Sahitya Academy, the state publishes the book, it gets known. So as far as publishing goes, that is the thing about awards. The awards are necessary. Of course, very often they may not be fair, or it's a matter of opinion, judgment, but awards have to be there. The next question is that you see, poetry or whatever, any literature is a medium of communication. Now, as long as it is communicating with the concerns of a market, concerns of the people, it will sell. You see, if you're not communicating, you're writing about something which, see, today's life is extremely fast-paced and nobody has time for a mushaira or a kavi goshti. So the time, say Ghalib's time or Zok's time or even, Neeraj's time or Narendra Sharma's time, when people sat and deliberated about the beauty of what these people wrote, that era is over. And today you just have time for a different form of poetry. So when people could not do this, could not pay attention to this kind of attention that is required for poetry, the poets started turning to the cinema as a medium. You see, it got them a much better, they leveraged the talent much more, it reached many more people, and many poets are remembered by Shailendraji also wrote very good poetry, but all of us tend to remember what came on the radio, what was in a movie. So these things keep happening, and we don't really have quotas for, this many books on this or that or that. It depends on a market really. A market-driven publisher will publish whatever is demanded in a market.
Okay, thank you. What about you when you write the poetry?
The thing that you mentioned earlier about set quotas or certain themes, see, that's a very journalistic way of approaching publishing. Because, say, newspapers, I worked for the Hindu for some time, and I know how this kind of thing goes. You construct a narrative. So you have these many rape stories, these many corruption stories, these many international conflict stories, and so on and so forth. And it is a concise way of finding a market. But it is not, I mean, it's basic economics. The demand does not necessarily need to precede the supply. You create markets in order to then supply the goods, right? So small presses cannot do that. And it's mostly small presses that are publishing poetry. Penguin is an already established name. Whatever they publish will sell, because it's this Faber and Faber. It's this long tradition of publishing great books that have changed people's lives, etc. But there are a lot of small presses that are run by people my age, you know, in the early and late 20s. And they need a lot of visibility, recognition, and most of all, they need money. And grants are few and far between. They're very rare to come by. A writer might get a writer's residency, and then through that, they might get some kind of distribution. But it's not always the case. So I think a lot of focus needs to be given not to the thematizing of the whole ethos of the publishing space, but just to print quality work regardless. Because, like you said, if the 5 people who write romantic poetry are much better than the 5 that fit the theme,
Yes.
It makes no sense to accept bad poems. It just reflects badly on your establishment. So,
Yeah, this is what we believe in the Romani way. But as you mentioned, Penguin, the word is commercialized so well in the publishing industry. You know, Penguin also a Penguin Customs book, where there's a fixed price for you pay for the publishing books, a fixed price for the newspaper reviews, and which is doing much better than the whole business of the Penguin Publishing House itself. So here, what I again put a question to both of you, that in this, when we're talking about everybody believes that, most of us believes that, for an author or for a poet, it's good to have an establishing publishing house, which will help, as you yourself said. But saying so, giving an example of author Savi Sharma, the Surat-based author, who has first novel self-published and sold more than 3 lakhs of copies. Then she got a publisher lined up, but first was a self-published book. So what do you think? It's just one of that case that a self-published author got that name and from some city from the Surat? Or you think it's one of the case, and it's better to always have, for a poet or author, to have a so-called established publishers? Adding to that, my question is, if it is like a so-called established publishers, like this Harper, Westland, Penguin, it is, their internal balance sheet, if you see, even shows the Penguin Customs is a much profitable venture than the Penguin company itself, which is, of course, the 100% paid, and not they are taking the money which is only for the publishing, but there's a much more markup because they're giving you the Penguin name and the brand for that. Thank you.
See, this brings us back to the thing of, it's a form of patronage, where you are patronizing yourself. That is, you pay somebody to publish your book. It could be Penguin, it could be yourself. It is a form, you know, like as I said, these two environments, they coexist. You know, there is a market, there is a patronage. Now, all these things, you know, even big publishing houses taking money to publish something comes under this label of category of the patronage market. Now, if somebody publishes a book herself and it sells so many copies, it's truly good. The only thing a publishing house does is it gives an endorsement to the poet or to the author. So how important this endorsement is. In fact, now in the era of internet, this endorsement is becoming less and less important, because you see, with the pace of life changing, as I said, very few people have time to sit and contemplate over the beauty of words or words themselves. So writing itself is under pressure. Lyrics are under pressure even in the film industry, because sound has become more important. You know, sound effects are more important today. So you want just a beat. You see, people don't have the time to appreciate a beautiful poems will still be there. But everybody, an auto rickshaw driver to a techie, they have this earphone on, and what they want is the beat. You can pick up a lyric, you can even take Mirza Ghalib and, you know, remix him into whatever beat you want. Okay, so that will always, so today it has shifted, you see, the entire focus has shifted from lyric into beat. Okay, there was this, I would just like to give one small example of something which went viral on internet and became a big hit, Kolaveridi. Kolaveridi, nobody, see, it is no longer necessary to understand the lyrics. It might have had beautiful lyrics. For those of us who did not understand the lyrics, it was still a big hit. So now we have reached a stage where from the written word, we are going back to sound which is much more innate and we relate much more to sound. So the beat and the rhythm has displaced lyric. Not to say that lyrics don't exist or that lyrics are no longer beautiful, but they are becoming lesser and lesser, less and less important. See, at one time, the lyricist had the pride of place. The music composer was given the lyrics and asked to compose even in a movie. Today, it's the other way around. Today, they give you the music and then ask the lyricist to write. So there is a slowly, as this happens, it's getting marginalized. There is a problem, writing itself is under pressure today.
Okay, I'd just like to say that this pursuit of happiness narrative is very suspect. Not everyone enjoys the kind of success through a self-publication. It's an exceptional case, and I don't think it is a useful example for aspiring poets and writers because it can lead to a lot of disappointment. And it's important to be ready to accept rejection. It's important to be ready to understand that maybe the sensibility for their work is not developed yet. And it's also important to understand that maybe their work will get recognition after they die. This is the condition writers must live with.
No, it's a different era we're talking about because what ma'am said that there was a time when we had a music of and lyrics of Shailind and Pradeep Kumar, and when Raj Kapoor came back to his home, so Nargis once in Aata Se Sane Hue Haath, and there's become a, based on that the whole movie, one of the hittest movie over time has been produced and directed. And based on the Pradeep and Shailind's song, the whole movie has to be directed or produced, the story has to be crafted as a movie. And then we have passed through the same generation when we talk about only those type things of can be hit. No, there's a song which Aage Aage Halwa Wala Aa Gaya was a hitter song of his time. There's no lay, no sur, no tal. The song was only Aage Aage Halwa Wala Aa Gaya. Mithun Chakravarti has sang. This was quite a hit song. So this Bangalore Poetry Festival has been trying to dispel the belief that the poetry today is not read as much like before. What's your take on that? You think, and also if this is true, festivals like this poetry festivals, will help encouraging the culture of the reading poetry, or you think is just same like what we want, we are crafting, and Halwa Wala becomes one, and Hawa Hawa Khushbu Luta De becomes one, and all the Shailind Pradeep Kumar has been gone before?
See, I'd like to say that even by the time we came to Mere Watan Ke Logo, it is identified solely with Lata Mangeshkar. Very few people will know even who wrote the lyric. So, slowly it is not irrelevant, nothing will become irrelevant. It just becomes, see, as technology takes over, as the world becomes more and more technology driven, it is an inevitable thing, an inevitable thing that, the love of lyrics, yes, it will come back, you see. I mean, in the sense that there are movies, the lyrics stand out when they are good. But today the poet does not any longer enjoy the kind of status that even a very poor Ghalib enjoyed. See, he says, Vagarna shehr mein Ghalib ki abru kya hai? Ghalib is Ghalib, I am still, important to my city. See, today it has changed completely. Today the person with status is the person who knows technology. So you have apps, which will tell you how to, mix music, do this, do that. So, the whole scenario is changing. And this has been happening slowly. As I said, even long before this, Mere Vata, is it Pradeep or Bharat Vyas? Pradeep. Bharat Vyas. Yes, I think it is Bharat Vyas who wrote. But you see, nobody pays any attention to that. The lyrics are as important as the music there, but by then itself it had started declining. So it is something inevitable, and the question to ask is, what do we do about it? Yes, festivals like this are extremely relevant. In fact, the fact that so many people are here even for this session, it indicates that people have an interest. So, and as a publisher, I feel extremely, limited, actually not quite capable, because see, the printed word is not the medium for poetry. You need to see the poet. You need to see his passion, it's a performance. And even here, those of you who have seen, poets recite, you have gone and picked up the books. You did not pick up the books. See, the market will create a star system where whoever becomes a star will be sold in the market. A poetry festival is important for beginners. If they catch your imagination, you will probably go out and buy the book. Okay, so that is how
I believe poetry is like a painting. The poetry is like a painting, like whatever digitization thing is that you can work with the novel or something, but like a painting, the artist has to paint from the starting and begin whatever digital thing can make videos and all. So the poet, nothing important for a poet than to complete one poem or something. And before we move further, I request, because she's coming up with her second book, if she could read few lines for our audience from her new book, which is still not published. Thank you. Yeah. And if you could tell us just about that book also, how it differentiates from your first poetry book as well.
So my first collection of poems, Ecdysis, it'll be available outside. It deals with a very different...
Which you all supposed to buy, right?
Yeah. I mean, if you want to, no pressure. Only if you like it. It's very different from what I have been writing of late, because that work was written with a complete awareness of the fact that I am writing in free verse, and it kind of imposes a bigger responsibility on one to be careful with what words they use. A lot of the time, I'm very influenced by the modernists, even though I don't like Ezra Pound or T.S. Eliot that much. In a formalistic sense, they've been very important. And so has Seamus Heaney. So I think in this new book, I'm writing from a more informed perspective, with a better awareness of the music and the rhythm in poetry. So, and also, they're different because I'm also a different person. They sell newspapers and keychains and journals and so on and so forth. Every void is an opening, always so gentle when it starts. Yet there you are, thick, in its nectarine viscosity. A spacious nest now expands wider than your being's nest. And your heart spirals tight into itself, now begun to slide into an emptiness, into soft light. You enter this world wet and worried, still clutching at the fibers of existence. Your hands soon relinquish an old home, suspended in an unfamiliar vacuum, the blissful silence of your mother's womb. Every one of your skin's old aches, now gone free of a familiar surface. Your own white and pink tenement retains your paralyzed, quivering flesh. Eyelids shut, how the mind breathes, slow as you float in someone else's dream. You open your eyes to get off the train, hear the routine chatter of hissing, shuffling feet as you return home burning from work. Crows in circles slow overhead, as though you were dying, years withering with every tomorrow. Car noises, honks and brooms irrigate the shop windows, where a garment waits without character, and it rests fully without you. In its empty sleeves it calls you out. Your lover might not come home today. He warned you of it the previous night, and you'd let him walk his own way. You light a cigarette as your eyes search for a friendly kiosk. A man sits behind the counter, smothered among flapping straight tongues of newsprint and quick feisty winds, old as the trees that scent the paper. Shrouded in a fort of ink and magnets, postcards and keychains, he meets your glance as though he were yours, waiting for you to bring him groceries, anticipating being carried home. You don't know him. He looks as though he has half a life left. He could be your stillborn brother. In him you see the pain of lovers trying still to punish you with their silence over political differences, and then some with their insincere friendship. In his assessing eyes, your dead father lurks, their wrinkles drawn on by an ex-boyfriend who sometimes painted you, to make you quieter. He could not take your sparring. And one day he tore up the canvas when he began to hate you. Wrinkles extend speechless, infinitely beyond the range of a voix celeste from one Haussmannian window nearby, spelling constellations that do not exist. The man at the kiosk says many things without a glance, so still, piquant in his pallid frame. You find some remnant of a hateful prime minister, whose words you are very unhappy with. You'd like one day to turn around, get off the bus and walk your feet home. It would be nice encountering a newsstand where the guy selling newspapers is just a guy selling newspapers, short of leaving your soul in tatters. You don't have to meet his gaze when you light a cigarette and acknowledge the fear that this might not be your life.
Thank you. Now, just a quick question for you, ma'am. In so many years of your publishing thing, you think, which is the best published book, which you think, this is the work you really enjoyed and this is what...
See, actually...
No, don't give a diplomat answer that. There's many books you have enjoyed.
Answer.
Which is you think you're the best?
The best, though, I cannot say, because, it is like all books are like actually, if you have 3 children, you can't say this is the best child, we love all the books we publish. Now, since this is a poetry festival, and the only reason I am here is that a couple of years ago, I went for an event in the British Council, and there was this poet who had an English poet. He lives in Wales, and he read his poetry. I fell in love with it. And just went up, I told the lady at the British Council, this is beautiful, I'd like to bring this out, an edition of this in India. So she said, okay, why don't you just go talk to him? In fact, he was looking for someone who'll do it. And then it just so happened that we connected so well, and he's not just a lovely poet, but an absolutely lovely man. And he immediately said, okay, Jamuna, I understand how difficult it is to publish, so I want no royalty, nothing for this book. Just do it in India, take permission from I'll talk to my publisher, and it can be done. And in about 6 months' time, it was done. Now, this was a labor of love. This was something which I did because I wanted to do it. It was the joy of publishing. But if you ask me, is this kind of joy sustainable in publishing? No, it's not.
Okay. Thank you. Before we end, we just take 2 quick questions because we have short of time. So, yes, we take both the questions together and then we answer, please. Yes, please. We have to give a mic or? Just ask straight the question, the specific question. Sorry? It's not a question, then this is the comments we can take later on, yeah. Anybody else has a question? Okay, so before we end this, if you could both advise for the new writers who have their poetry collections and they want to get it published, what's your message for them and how should they proceed to get their works published?
Okay, very quickly, I'd like to say, submit to as many magazines as possible, get feedback, see if your work needs improvement. When you're submitting work to magazines, if it gets rejected, don't renounce writing altogether, keep writing, submit more work, and don't fight with the editor. Read the submission guidelines, respect the publication, don't expect them to do the handiwork for you, like writing your bio, etc. Be concise, learn to pitch yourself better, learn to synopsize your work. Don't send them long emails about what your work is about. Be concise, be quick, and learn to articulate what you're doing very intelligently. That's something I think everyone needs to really keep in mind.
Thank you. What about you, ma'am?
I would say that, since at least in India, it's not possible for anyone to be a full-time poet. They all have other jobs. They should consider their love for poetry as an escape from the grind of the job and do something because they love doing it. Now, they do something they love. The publishing, the publisher, everything will come sooner or later. And they should not even hesitate to publish themselves. There is no great, it is not anything which is something to be ashamed of. But I feel that, as long as you're doing anything because you want to do it, one must be very detached from whether one will get a publisher, whether after having get a publisher it will sell, after that will it give you enough money. These are all very irrelevant questions, because poetry is a culmination of the desire for freedom and the desire to rise above the mundane. It's an almost spiritual kind of an exercise. And whoever loves poetry should write poetry, irrespective of irrelevant people like publishers and money, and difficult, but yes, worth it. Thank you.
Okay, I end with this note saying, coinciding with ma'am, that there's a say, मैं गा तो दूं पर राग नहीं मिलती, मैं ताज तो बनवा दूं पर मुमताज नहीं मिलती, जी तो करता है सारे दिन कविता लिखूं पर उसे रोजगार नहीं मिलती. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamuna, Medha, and Sundeep. I think it was very insightful for a lot of aspiring poets, and wonderful way of ending it saying, don't worry about getting published or any of it. If you love writing, just keep writing.